Hi there. My name is Alan Furstenberg and I'm a project guru with Objective Consulting. Like a lot of people, I enjoy Hangouts on Google+. In particular, I like it now that the API for Hangouts is available for programmers. One of the questions I see a lot on the Google Groups discussion about the Hangout API are people wondering how to incorporate Hangouts with their own website. Now, Google doesn't allow you to put a Hangout inside the website itself, but it does allow you to create a button that links from your website to a Hangout. In this tutorial, I'm going to go over at least one of the ways that we can do this and explore some of the advantages and limitations of this technique. Before we begin, you're going to need to be at least somewhat familiar with HTML and JavaScript programming. You should also know what a Hangout is and be at least a little familiar with using it, even if you haven't used the Hangout API before. One of the things we are not going to cover in this tutorial is how to incorporate any server-side technology that you may be using. So if you're using .NET or Java or PHP or any other server-side technology, you will need to know some of this, but we're not going to discuss how to do so. So with that, let's jump in.
For starters, we're going to need an HTML page from which to launch our Hangout. I have one conveniently here called helpdesk sample. It's the index.html file. I have as part of it a brief style sheet just to do some simple layout. And as part of it, I have a form. And this form is the most important portion of the page. So in this case, it's going to be the only thing. It's important in this case, a couple of things. We need an action that's going to be redirected to plus.google.com/hangouts/_. And this is going to tell Google Plus to create a new Hangout with our application running in it. We're going to need to use the get method, and as part of this, it's going to append all of our parameters as part of the URL. And we'll be explaining and looking at these parameters in just a moment. One of the parameters that's going to be required is the identifier for the app that we're about to create. And right now here is the identifier for my app. I'll show you in a minute how we get this number. The other thing we're going to need is a parameter called GD. And this GD is the data that we're going to be sending into the app when it starts. Now, we're only allowed to send one piece of data in, so there are some tricks that we need to play if we want to do more than one, but in this case we only want one. We just want a simple pull-down menu from which they can select, what is this about? Is it about a Hangout? Is it about the API? Is it about the +1 button? And then we have a simple submit button. So if we go to Chrome, what we see here is we have a nice simple page, a pull-down menu, and the submit button. The GID is a hidden form field, which is pretty normal. We'll go back and look at our page. And again, we're going to go over where the GID comes from, how to get it, and we'll go over some things about what we can put in this GD field, and we'll see how this is used when we call the form. So now we have a basic form that we can start with. The app itself is going to be written in JavaScript. All Hangout apps are written in JavaScript, and they're launched from within the Hangout itself, and then they run from within the Hangout. So we get to use HTML and JavaScript and the usual round of stuff that we're very familiar with. So as part of this, we're going to be creating a few more files. One of these is an HTML file which is going to be loaded into an iframe. And I'll explain where this iframe comes from again in a few minutes. There are a couple of important components to this HTML file that we're going to need. These first two lines, for example, that we see here are scripts that are loaded that are required for the Hangout. The first is the Hangout Talk Gadget RPC service. The second is the Talk Gadget Hangout API itself. and we're working with version 1.0 of the Hangout API. As Google releases new versions, this version number is going to change. Next, I'm going to be loading from Google the Jquery library. This is going to help with a few things later on. If you don't know Jquery, it's a good toolkit to use, although there are other toolkits which are also equally good. I'm just most familiar with Jquery, so I chose to use it here. We're going to load the style sheet and the JavaScript for our sample, and those will be running, and we'll look at the JavaScript in a moment. Then finally in the body, we create a place for a message to be displayed. And then the last thing that happens is we're going to load the Google API JavaScript. And as part of that, we're going to indicate when everything is ready, we're going to call the onClientReady method that was part of our JavaScript. So let's take a look at what our JavaScript looks like. The JavaScript itself is fairly short and simple. The onClientReady method is the one that I already referred to. It gets called once everything on the page has been loaded. What it's going to do is then make a call to the onAPI-ready event handler. This basically ensures that all of the Hangout infrastructure that we're working with is all set up and the Hangout itself is ready to run. So this defines a function that will be called then. We're going to check the event to make sure that the API is ready. And once it is, we're going to call the onAPI-ready function, which is the bulk of what we're going to be doing here today. And that's the next function that we define, onAPI-ready. So, as part of the onAPI-ready, we need to do a couple of things. For starters, we're going to get all of the parameters. These were the parameters that were used to load our HTML. As part of it, it includes several things that we're going to need, including the GD parameter, which we specified back on our HTML here. I've written a short function up here, which basically loops through the location of the HTML, the URL that's provided as part of it, breaks it up by ampersand, and then breaks those up into key value pairs and returns all of that as an object. So the param variable is just going to contain some keys and values containing what was sent over as part of the HTML. I also grabbed the current date just because I like grabbing the current date. We're now going to do something that's specific to the Hangout API. One of the things that we want to do as part of this help desk is contact our server, and as part of it include the URL for the Hangout that we're currently in. This way, we can tell somebody, for example, at help desk support, or somebody who's on call, exactly what Hangout we're in so that they can get a hold of us. The GAPI Hangout get Hangout URL function call gets the Hangout URL that we're currently in. Seems pretty straightforward. In addition to this, we could call various other parameters that are specified by the Hangout API. These can call things like getting our name, getting some other information about ourselves that we're willing to make available. These could be useful in various situations, but in this particular case, all we want is the Hangout URL. If you're interested in what else is available, I encourage you to take a look at the full API specification. This not only gives you what data is available in the Hangout, but also tells you about some other things that you can do as part of the Hangout, which are useful. Finally, we're going to be making an Ajax call, or a JSON call specifically, to a URL back on our server. So we need to specify the page on our server that's going to be receiving it. In this case, it's called registerhangout.json. We're going to be calling this and sending as part of it several parameters, including the Hangout URL as well as the value of the GD parameter. We're going to take a look at that in a second. I'm making use here of the Jquery Ajax function call. What this does is it sets up a call to the callback URL that we've specified. We're specifying that we want to do this using JSON. So it's going to be sending out the values as part of a parameter list, and it will be expecting to get back a JSON structure. Finally, we specify what parameters we want in the data field here. And in this, we want to set one of the parameters to Hangout URL, and its value is going to be the Hangout URL that we already computed. And we want to set the topic. And to do this, we're going to be pulling in from the parameters that were set for this HTML file, and we want the GD parameter specifically. It has to be the GD parameter. GD is the only parameter that we're allowed to send using this method. Finally, if things work out okay, we're going to use jQuery and set the message on the screen to whatever message we get back as part of JSON. And if there's a problem, we're going to say that there is an error. So that's our JavaScript in a nutshell. It all is fairly simple and pretty straightforward. I think the most complicated part of this is that we need to get just the GD parameter in our particular case. That's the only one that's going to be available, and that's the one that we need to use. And we need to make sure that we set our callback URL to a page on our server that is going to be able to handle these parameters. We're going to see what this query looks like in a few minutes. If we go to Google's API console at code.google.com/apis/console, and assuming we've already logged in, which I have in this case, it'll present us with the various projects that we have. In this case, I'm going to take a look at the help desk sample project that I've been working on. We're going to need to indicate what services this using, and this is what gives us access to a wide variety of Google's APIs. In our case, we want to make sure that the Google Hangouts API is turned on. Since it is, we can now look at the Hangout settings itself. There's a lot of information and links here, and if you're not familiar with Hangout app development, I encourage you to read and follow them all. I'm going to run you through some of them fairly quickly, though. The thing that is most required is the application URL. This is the configuration file that specifies how our app is going to load and what other resources it needs. We're making use of an XML file provided by Wolf Dobson. He works for Google, and he's the one who came up with a way to provide parameters into our Hangouts. So we're going to enter in our URL here. In our case, it needs to be an HTTPS URL. So we're going to specify the helpdesksample.xml file. Let's go take a look briefly at what this XML file looks like. If we look at the helpdesk sample XML, there's an awful lot of code here. Fortunately, we don't have to make this ourselves. Wolf provided a way for us to access it and to have it generated for us. All we need to do is indicate where our HTML file is located. And I've put the full URL up here for the program that generates this. It is https hangout-iframer.appspot.com/v0.2 question mark u equals, and then the URL for the HTML file for our app. And this was the HTML file that loads the JavaScript in it. All you need to do is go to this URL, including your URL for your HTML file, and it will generate this entire thing. And then you just need to cut and paste it into an XML file of your own. Back on the code console, we've entered this as part of the application URL. We've then entered a title for our application as well. In this case, we call it Help Desk Sample. For most normal applications, you'll want to specify some icons. And if you wanted to run this as an extension, you'll want to check this box. And I encourage you to click on Learn More to see exactly what both of these are about. We're not going to need it in this particular case. You may also want to enter in a description. Finally, one of the things that's required is that you provide links to your terms of service, your privacy policy, and your support contact information. And although these can be fairly simple, Google does require that you enter them. We'll see where these show up in a few minutes. Finally, as noted here, only a registered Chrome Web Store developer will be able to release their application. This is a simple verification process that does require $5. But I suggest you go ahead, get yourself verified, and then you can publish as many apps as you want. Once you've done all of this, you can click on Save. Now, one of the things we're going to need from this page is what our application ID is. We're going to need to enter this back as part of our HTML form so we can trigger the application to be started immediately. To get this, we'll go up in the URL, and we see this portion that says project has a number, Hangout. Well, that number is our application ID. So we're going to need to copy this and go back to our form and make sure we've pasted it into the form. So now we're ready to go back and see how this looks. We go back to our Help Desk Sample index page. And since we already know everything there is to know about Hangouts, we're going to ask about the API and say that we'd like some help. We're taken to Google's sign-in page, where we're going to sign in. The Hangout begins to load, and we're shown a message that it needs our permission in order to start. That's fine. So we're going to say continue. It's asking for permission to view the list of participants in the Hangout, manage the audio and video feed, know who we are on Google. And here's where the terms of service, the privacy policy, and more information about our program that we provided in the console come into play. Since we want these to run, we're going to have to click Allow Access. And it continues to load our Help Desk app. Once we close the invitation screen, we get a message, somebody will be with you shortly, please stand by, which is exactly what was returned by our JSON script. So let's take a look at some of this. If we go look at the network requests that went by, we can see that there was a request for register hangout.json. Let's take a look at this in more detail. The request URL goes back to register hangout.json, just like we specified. The parameters that are included here are our Hangout URL, and there's the address of our Hangout URL, which matches what's at the top of our browser here, and a string with the topic, Google API. So these are being sent to our server. Our server is responding with some JSON, which has our message, someone will be with you shortly, please stand by, which our app has shown on the screen. So we've come full circle. We've launched this Hangout from our website. We've sent a message from this app to our server, and our server has sent back a JSON reply. We can do anything in particular we want with that reply. Most importantly, however, we have sent the Hangout URL to our server. And once that is sent to our server, we can do anything with it that we want. We can put it into a database and show it to other users that come along. We can send it to our help desk personnel so they can respond to it appropriately. Whatever is most suitable for the need and for the application that you're writing.
I hope this has given you a good idea of how you can incorporate your website with a Google Plus Hangout. Don't forget that one of the things you're going to need to do is be able to handle the JSON call from the Hangout to your server. If you're not sure how to do this, there are many tutorials out there on the web for your particular server technology. If you still have trouble, my company, Objective Consulting, is more than happy to help you integrate this with your new or legacy system. You can find us at spiders.com. If you have any questions about this tutorial, you can find me on Google Plus as Alan Furstenberg, or you can send a message to the Google Groups Hangout API group discussion, and I usually monitor that and will be happy to answer questions there. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy and send some feedback.